is beer? Well, certainly beer's 10 minutes of pleasure.
It's the chosen brew of the gods.
It is the most popular alcoholic beverage in the nation.
We Americans think of beer as our national drink. It's as American as baseball and apple pie.
A seemingly simple brew steeped in passion, pride, and contradictions.
According to the Reinheitsgebot law in Germany, beer is only 4 things. It's malted barley, water, yeast, and hops.
Doctors have prescribed it, and Congress has banned it.
Beer is kind of a window into human condition throughout history. It takes you to artistic places, gastronomic places, historical places.
Beer is the elixir of life.
Every generation has redefined its flavor, but its story is older than America itself.
Years ago, if you walked into a brew pub, and there weren't that many 15 years ago, it was typical that you would find maybe 3 beers on tap.
Pilsner?
If you look out on our board today, we've got, I think, 14, possibly 15 of our beers on right now.
And you wanted a pale, honey?
I try all these unique and out there beers because it's really fun. I mean, there's an enormous array of ingredients that are available out there potentially to add to beer. Well, today we're making some Jasmine IPA. It's sort of a specialty of mine. So what I'm going to do now is prepare a bag of Jasmine to go into this IPA, this India Pale Ale that I'm making. This is really wonderful stuff. The smell is incredible, especially in this kind of volume. Should do it for this one. The use of these ingredients is not at all unlike the way a chef will go to the produce market or something like that and come up with the ingredients for that day's meal. So this is the first Jasmine edition that we'll do. We'll be putting more in a few minutes. Coming to a brew pub and having a beer is like taking a tour of a factory that you really have always wanted to get inside, you know, seeing how they make baseball gloves or something like that. When I take people on a tour through the cellar here at Elysian and point out that the beer line that's coming off the bottom of the tank goes out to the bar, they're thrilled.
Most people think of beer as coming from a factory, but in fact, we're doing things here very much by hand. If you had a brewer from 200 years ago came into the brew house and had a look around, he might not recognize every single piece of machinery, each pump, etc. But he would definitely recognize the entire process from start to finish. It looks pretty much the same.
Beer, and our love affair with it, began in the 1600s when the first colonists landed in Virginia.
Most people don't realize that America has a very long beer history. Here at the Governor's Palace, we are brewing a strong ale, and we are starting the process right now by mashing. During this process, it's almost like making tea. You're extracting the flavors and sugars from the grain into the liquid. They're going to use this same grain 2 or 3 times to make 2 or 3 separate batches. Each time they do that, they'll get a little less alcohol. So you're supposed to make a strong ale, and then the second beer would be referred to as a table beer, and the third beer was called small beer. And small beer is your everyday beverage. That's what you're drinking for breakfast, dinner, and supper.
Beer was more than a social drink. It was the lifeblood of the early settlements.
Within the first year of arriving in Virginia, the governor wrote a note back to England saying he needed 2 brewers to come over and establish a brewery in Jamestown. He said, to plant a colony by water drinkers is an error that will result in ill health.
In colonial times, milk and even water were full of dangerous microorganisms, and people got sick from them. But beer was free of such dangers. Its unique combination of high acidity, hops, and a bit of alcohol is a brew in which no harmful bacteria can survive.
Beer was an essential part of life for everyone. They weren't about to serve disease-borne water to their children, so even children had their version of low-alcohol beer.
Now we'll strain that liquid out, separate it from the grain. At this point, it's referred to as wort, and this will be the basis for the beer. During the colonial period, it's an everyday skill for any housewife. You wouldn't marry a woman who didn't know how to brew beer, as just like you wouldn't marry a woman who couldn't cook.
Colonists brought their passion for beer with them from Europe. Ale became an essential supply for a safe Atlantic crossing.
When the Pilgrims were heading to America, they were not actually intending to land in Massachusetts. They were looking for Northern Virginia. They encountered several storms, they got blown off course, and their beer supply started running low. So it's no surprise that you could read things like William Bradford in his diary on the Mayflower saying, their victuals were nearly spent, especially their beer. So they set foot at what we now call Plymouth Rock because, amongst other things, they needed beer.
At this point, we're going to take the wort and put it back into the pot to boil. And the hops, the other vital ingredient in beer, will be added. Hops will add a bitterness to the beer.
The essential ingredients in beer, hops and barley, were scarce in the Americas. Cut off from European suppliers, colonial brewers did what Americans always do. They improvised.
If barley be wanting to make into malt, we should be contented and think it no fault, for we can make liquor to sweeten our lips of pumpkins and parsnips and walnut tree chips. And if you look at the old recipes, that's really not far from the truth. They made beer out of whatever they could find, out of pumpkins and molasses and things like that. There's a famous recipe in George Washington's hand, and it's the most god-awful thing you would ever want. It's basically a small amount of molasses and a handful of bran, and it makes 5 gallons of drink. But of course, what that was just the small beer. It was basically the soda pop of the day, and everyone drank it.
All the founding fathers, virtually all of them, either brewed beer or they certainly drank beer. Thomas Jefferson built a brewery at Monticello. James Madison proposed that we have a national brewery.
He said that it would be a much better idea to instill in people a taste for beer rather than whiskey. Right now we're straining the hops from the wort. And then at this point the wort will be ready to ferment. We'll let it cool down and then we can put our yeast in it. The yeast does the hard work for you, makes it into beer. Lots of people in the 18th century get paid in beer. Servants in a property like the governor's palace would receive beer allowances, and soldiers sometimes were paid in beer as well.
There's lots of little examples of things like that in our history that we just don't know about. We probably would have studied harder in school if they told us these things. So beer keeps weaving in and out of the national fabric.